Hi, everyone. So glad you all could join us today. My name is Esther Ann. Louise Esther Ann, Passamaquoddy Nil, Wabanaki Nujeyu Zibayig, Nurebeg Zibayig, Wigulbanawapskewi. My name is Esther Ann. I am a Wabanaki person, people of the Dawn. I am Passamaquoddy from Pleasant Point. And I live here with Penobscot people in Penobscot territory. And I would like next to have Michael, just everyone that you see on the screen, we're going to go in order, just kind of introduce yourself, and then I will do a background and history of the ICWA work group. Michael, do you want to go next?
Hello, my name is Michael Augustine. I am a member of the Aroostook County Band of Micmac, the Elsipogtog First Nations, and New Brunswick. I currently work with the Penobscot Nation Child Welfare here on Penobscot territory.
And hi, everyone. My name is Shi Chen. I'm an Assistant Attorney General for the State of Maine's Office of the Maine Attorney General. We represent, myself and 18 other colleagues represent DHHS in child protection proceedings. They're also known as child dependency proceedings across the state. And across the nation. And I'm primarily based out of the Augusta region, which is in central Maine, for people familiar with the state.
Hi, everyone. My name is Luke Joseph. I'm the Director at the Aroostook Band of Micmac. I'm Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, Micmac descent. I currently work as like I said before, the ICWA Director for the Aroostook Band of Micmacs, my wife's tribe, and I've been doing this for about almost 5 years, a little over 5 years now.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Martha Prue, and I work for the Department of Health and Human Services in Maine for the Office of Child and Family Services, and I'm in the Policy and Training Unit, and I'm also the Tribal Liaison.
Thank you, Martha. So I'm just going to share a few slides with folks. I think I can, oh, I did it. I love technology, especially when somebody like Laura is in charge. So as I said, Wabanaki, as it's known today, is Wabanaki, which means the people of the place where the sun first looks our way. We're the people of the dawn. And that's how you say it in our language, and it's been shortened and kind of anglicized to Wabanaki, but that is how we're known here today. So we, the Wabanaki people, have our traditional territory includes what is now known as the state of Maine. We have had contact with settlers and the Europeans a lot longer than some of the tribes that are further out west. At one time, we had over 20 tribes in our confederacy, and now there are 4 federally recognized tribes in 5 locations in the state. So we've suffered about a 98% population depletion since first contact. In particular, between 1616 and 1619 was called the time of the Great Dying, and we lost upwards of 70% to 90% of our population in those 3 years. So that's a loss of land. Has been prolific here in Maine. Our territory has been dispossessed. Although we have a Maine Claims Settlement Act, it's still problematic for us today. So what you see here on this map is represents part of our traditional territory. And on this next slide, what you see in red represents all of the reservation, the fee lands, and the trust lands that we still hold title to today. So we've been pushed onto these tiny pieces of territory, tiny pieces of land, and the assaults, and this is due to, not unlike every other indigenous tribe across this country, due to strategies of genocide. but some of these strategies of genocide still happen today. In particular, when we're talking about fishing rights or rights to regulate water quality and things like that in the state. So what Wabanaki people have endured, you know, we've been in this territory for about 13,000 years, and I like to, I wish I had thought of doing this visual, but I like to do this visual where we, you know, have a timeline of 13,000 years to the present, and then we show the little tiny slice of time that we have had contact with Europeans and how much change has occurred in that little bit of time. The Wabanaki Tribes, we have always lived off the land. We more recently, post-colonial, we're wonderful basket makers. We've sold our baskets, and that was a way of living. Fishers, hunters, not as much agricultural, but because we moved a lot with the seasons and with the animals up and down the rivers. In 2012, there was a pretty extensive health needs assessment done with in all of the Wabanaki communities through the Indian Health Services, and the information that they gathered was pretty telling. The things that stick out in my mind are, you know, they ask questions not only about physical health, about emotional health. They asked questions around intergenerational trauma. They asked people what they thought, you know, how often they thought of the loss of land and lives and culture, and found out that they think about that all the time. And couple that with how they respond to that is depression, anxiety, and anger. So, you know, we have a lot to grieve about, but we also have a lot to celebrate. You know, I often ask a lot of elders, you know, how did you do it? How did we survive? What caused us to survive? These tribes that are left, and you know, not all of them survived. One of the last tribes that was massacred was the Norwalk, and that wasn't that long ago. You know, we've survived bounty proclamations on our body parts and our bodies. We've survived being pushed onto reservations. We've survived having our land illegally seized. And I ask people, so why is that? And they talk about family and they talk about children. And then they start talking about how the sacrifices that even they made, it wasn't so that they could benefit, it was for our descendants, our upcoming generations. So family and children and transmission of culture is very important. So interest, maybe not interest into the Native people on the line, but having a sense of humor came back as one of the most frequent answers that enabled people to be able to survive, to keep hope. Because we are still here, we're the Wabanaki nations are still strong and we're still sovereign, and this tribal state work group is just one example of how that sovereignty is interpreted and manifested in this work group. So I'll start into the story of how this work group got together. So in 1999, the state of Maine was participated in a pilot review of their child welfare system, and they were found to have some issues with compliance. So they reached out to the tribes, all the child welfare folks from the tribes, and asked for help in developing a day-long training so that caseworkers could understand ICWA and be more apt to comply. And that was November of 1999. I was working for Penobscot Nation at the time, so I was there with the original group. And it was the first time that the tribes had had even come together. Like I remember going to that meeting and finding out who were the child welfare people in those positions in my own community at Pleasant Point, because I didn't know, because I didn't live there. I lived here with Penobscot people. And it was a really very tense meeting. Nobody really wanted to be there, but we all felt it was very important that we were there. And that's what kept us at the table through those initial meetings was, you know, in spite of how difficult and uncomfortable and it was to talk about these things, because things between the tribes and the state back in 1999 were pretty tenuous. The relationship was pretty tenuous. But we stayed, and we developed this day-long training that we facilitated in 5 areas around the state in May of 2000, trained over 500 caseworkers, and we had almost immediately realized that we couldn't just give them the legal piece of ICWA and tell them the nuts and bolts and, you know, this is what you're supposed to do. We realized that we really wanted them to understand the underlying need for this law and understand that this law reflects best child welfare practice. And so to that end, we needed to share history. We needed to let them know that this isn't, you know, that there's a lot of history behind this law, and it's very important for the tribe. So we started the morning with talking about what happened here in this territory. We talked about some of the major pieces of history, like what happened with our people in the boarding schools and what happened to our people in the Indian Adoption Project, how relocation acts have impacted people, how we've lost some of our members. So as we started doing that, we thought, well, we should really let people hear from some of our tribal members that were in state child welfare custody prior to the ICWA. So we wanted originally to do a panel discussion, but that wasn't going to be feasibly possible with 5 different trainings. So we created a video, and we interviewed about 10 Wabanaki people who were in state child welfare custody prior to 1978. And we just asked them to share their story. You know, what happened, what do you remember, and what do you remember growing up? How have these experiences impacted you as an adult? And then we asked them for their advice for Native children who are in state child welfare custody, what caseworkers can do, what to expect of foster parents, etc. And the video is very moving. We still use it today in training with state caseworkers. And but we learned a really difficult lesson when we made that video. And it gets a little easier every time I share the story, but it's still incredibly, you know, I can't believe we made this mistake. But what we did was we asked these folks to share their story, we recorded them, and we didn't do anything to take care of them afterwards. And looking back, you know, it's like, how could we have done that? It seems so simple to us now, but we were focused on this goal of educating, and we thought we were doing the best thing. So when we created the Truth and Reconciliation process, which I'll talk about in a little bit, we made a commitment to make that our priority, to take care of people. So the other lesson we learned in developing this belonging video is this is when we really started learning about this concept that we call intergenerational trauma. We didn't really have those words, but we saw in every one of these 10 stories of these Wabanaki people, we saw this theme emerge, and I think it was best articulated by one Penobscot woman who said, she said, I was overprotective of my children. I love them, but now that they're older, she said, I love them, but I can do without them, which was very, it was really difficult to hear that, but it was also very healing to be able to look at history and then see that that is the impact of these strategies of genocide against our people. And that is exactly what would happen to somebody who was taken as a child. So it was very helpful in that sense, this video that we developed. So after the trainings were over, we realized that we had a lot of work to do and that there were many aspects of our relationship between the tribes and the state around child welfare that needed some attention. So we stayed together. And as you'll hear from everybody else's perspective of how they joined, you know, in those early days, we stayed together and started really just having conversations and starting to get to know each other. Eventually, we started talking about issues about racism and oppression. I remember the first meeting where I said the word white people. It was really difficult because we didn't have an understanding of those issues and how complex they are. We thought, you know, some of us thought we were being racist by calling white people white. So we've come a long way since then. We started talking about not only the trauma that we have experienced individually, but the collective trauma that Native people have experienced. And it was difficult. It was not easy at all. When we started this, all right, I don't want to get, I'm trying to keep my thoughts here because I can talk for a long time, you guys. What time is it? Okay. So since then, we've done a lot, which you'll hear about. But one of the two things that have come out of this ICWA work group since 1999 is the Maine Wabanaki State Child Welfare Truth and Reconciliation Commission process. So for about 6 years, we were building a better relationship, working together, improving policy and training. We were even reviewing ICWA cases for evidence of bias and white privilege. And still, you know, the tribal child welfare workers would still come back and say, you know, it's good and we're getting along and things are a little better, but, you know, when things really matter and the rubber hits the road and whatever, we hit this wall and we don't know what it is. So the more we had these discussions, we realized that what we really did was in our best intention, we just kind of locked arms and went with each other into the sunset, you know, we're going to get along and we're going to do this without really examining the past. All of those things that we talked about made ICWA that necessary law. We never really talked about how those things were impacting us. So we decided to do a Truth and Reconciliation Commission process, and probably the most famous or the most common reference people have for a TRC, as they're called, is in South Africa after apartheid. It was a form of restorative justice. And we had the good fortune of learning from folks in Greensboro, North Carolina, the site of the first Truth Commission in this country that was focused on one particular event where the Klan murdered 5 Communist Labor Party workers during a Saturday morning demonstration in 1979. So it was in 2008. We had this big meeting with all the tribes and state representatives. We came together and we said, you know, do we want to do this? And we were thinking it was just going to be between the tribal child welfare and the state child welfare departments. But Denise Altivator, one of the members of actually not just one of the members, Denise was the person that shared her story of what happened to her in care and really led the way and paved the way for other people to be able to share their story and come back. So she said, why don't we bring it to the governor of the state of Maine and all the tribal chiefs. So we invited, in 2008, we thought, you know, let's do this, and the plan was, okay, the ICWA folks, the Native folks will go and figure out what this is going to look like. Truth about what? Reconciliation about what? What is it? So we went off on our own for almost 2 years, a little over 2 years, just having, discussions and learning about history. A lot of this history, I meet folks that are like, I never knew about boarding schools, never knew about the Indian Adoption Project. Well, a lot of the stuff we didn't know either. We were really delving into this. There was a school in Skowhegan for women and girls that had committed crimes, and that was used a lot for not just Native women, but to take children away from women in Maine, mostly poor women. So we were just researching these things, and we learned that one of the first thing you do for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission process is you create a declaration of intent. So we wrote this declaration of intent, asked the state to come back to the table in February of 2011. They came back to the table, and they said, they weren't really, we pushed the 6-page document in front of them, and we were, we felt good about it because the process that we went through to create this document, outlining all of our truths about what happened to Wabanaki people in child welfare was pretty cathartic and healing. But it was too much for the state, and they pushed back. And we realized that if we wanted this to be a truly collaborative process, that we needed to start over and write that declaration of intent with the state at the table. And that's exactly what we did. And in May of that year, that declaration of intent was signed by the chiefs and the governor of the state. And then a year later, they signed the mandate and seated the commission in February of 2013. And through that, Maine Wabanaki Reach grew out of that process because it was essentially a lot of the folks in this ICWA work group. We started, we set up this TRC, and then we needed to ensure that we had to help the commission fulfill their mandate. We helped them find access to Wabanaki people and non-Native people who wanted to share their story. We prepared people for sharing their story, and we supported them through it, which was the lesson that we learned from making that belonging video when we didn't take care of people then. So the commission released their report in 2015. They had 3 goals: truth, healing, and change. So truth is to, document what happened. So there's no more quibbling about what happened to Wabanaki people. We all agree what happened. And in that, telling their stories in that process provides them with some healing. And the change is the final report, which has 14 or 19 recommendations, 14 recommendations for change. And 7 of those recommendations are directly child welfare related. So REACH still exists today. We are actively implementing the recommendations of the commission. We are focused on decolonization and within a lens of restorative justice. We educate Mainers about history. We ask white Mainers to participate in decolonization by learning about history and repairing the harm of colonization to support Wabanaki self-determination. We do wellness work in tribal communities around restorative justice. So in August of 2015, the ICWA work group was re-energized or reconvened because we were all busy with this commission through those years. So our first task was we used the TRC recommendations kind of as a structure for our work plan, but we had to first educate. We had to change because the new BIA regulations came down at the same time, so we had to then change our policy and go and educate and train all of the caseworkers in that. But one of the recommendations, the findings of the commission, is they found that Native children were largely unidentified, that there were issues with identification of Native children and children who are ICWA. So that was one of the first tasks that we focused on. We spent some time educating. We still do the pre-service training, which is 3.5-hour training with caseworkers before they, when they're newly hired. And that, Martha and I do that. and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that. She'll probably speak about that too. But it's challenging. You know, it's challenging to, Maine's a big state, and as you saw on the map, the tribes are located all over the state. Geographically, we're not very close to each other, and it's a challenge to get full participation and full engagement. You know, the tribal partners are managing multiple, you know, they have multiple roles. Some of them are managing multiple programs. They're not just dedicated just to child welfare. Some of them, they have very little staff, which I'm sure they'll talk about. But we do whatever we can to try to make it easier for all the partners to engage in the work group. We change our meeting locations and offer for people to join by phone, and I keep in contact with people too. I'm the staff person. So one of the initiatives that the ICWA work group has taken is called Protect the Children Initiative, and it's really to try to help bring the responsibility for the protection of children back to the center of our tribal communities, because the way our child welfare programs are set up now are pretty colonial, right? There's a department and 2 or 3 people that we can get angry with when things don't go the way we want, right? I think our tribal child welfare workers, that it's stressful, and I don't know how they do it. Luke and Michael and everyone else, it's such a difficult job to navigate. So this Protect the Children initiative is proposing to tribal communities and tribal members that there are these different roles that you can take to be part of this protection, this circle of protection for children. And things like, definitely the needs that we've identified are, we need more qualified expert witnesses, and we'll talk more about our effort to train community members to do that. We need folks that want to be resource homes, foster homes, respite providers, even to just educate about ICWA and to learn about it. And then one thing that's been helpful and exciting is to have community hosts. So when we have Native children who are placed out of the community in non-Native homes, you know, many of them will sign a cultural contract, which I think we'll talk about later too. But it's still kind of intimidating to bring a child to a tribal community that you've never been to. So these community hosts buddy up with that family, and kind of they're like their guide at some of the gatherings that we have throughout the year in the Indian community. So I think that's all I want to say about that right now. What we'll do next is we'll hear from each of our panelists, Martha, Michael, and Luke. And they're going to share a little bit about their story, what brought them here around this ICWA work group collaboration. And after they speak, we'll have some discussion questions. So feel free, if you have any questions, to either, I think that you can just speak up, or you can write it in the chat box. Oh, Laura's typing, so she's going to tell us. And then you can have questions while each one is talking, or you can wait until all 4 of them are done, and then we'll have a panel discussion. All right, so Martha, do you want to
Sure.
share with us now?
Okay, thanks, Esther. As Esther said, my name is Martha Prue, and I work for the state's Child Welfare Agency. Just to give a little brief bio, I have been here for 33 years. And when Esther was talking about in the early 2000s when they started the ICWA training, when the group started meeting in 1999, that was the time that I was transitioning from a district office into central office. So I kind of got to see what was happening with the initial training and with the ICWA work group. And when the person that was assigned the liaison left in 2004, I asked for that to be one of my duties as well, because I'd found the training really interesting and I wanted to learn a lot more about it. I like relationship building, You know, I grew up in Maine, less than an hour from the Penobscot Nation, and knew nothing about Maine's Native American history. And I think that's something that a lot of non-Native people in Maine can certainly say. So when I first joined the ICWA work group in 2004, it was a really different experience because it wasn't like any other meeting or group that I belonged to through work in my professional capacity. It was a group that, although they had been established for 5 years, there was still a lot of mistrust, I think, between the tribes and the state. It took a long time to kind of feel out those relationships. And I had never joined a group before when I'd been questioned as to why I wanted to be part of this group, as opposed to it was just a job assignment and something that I was starting to do now. So it was a lot more of self-reflection than I had to do before at work. The group was very different in that it was very relational based, and I know that's one of the panel questions, so I won't get into that too much, but it's a very different work group in regard to trust because there had been so much history of mistrust between tribal government and state government. So it was really kind of feeling my way around in a different way that I had before. And I think it really hit home to me when one of the tribal child welfare administrators just looked at me and said, you know, the difference really between tribal child welfare and state child welfare, because we really are all looking to protect all the children. We're looking to keep families together. We're looking to reunify families. But when state staff come out and they're talking, they talk about their cases. When tribal child welfare staff talk, they talk about their families. So I think it was really that realization for me in how this was so much more personal, because this was their community, these were their families, they're looking to not lose more children to the dominant culture, that I think was a real learning for me. And, you know, we worked a lot on relationship building and communication, and as Esther said, you know, we really looked at, we were really getting along really well as the ICWA work group, but staff was still hitting that wall. So we started looking at ways of how can we really make a partnership, and how can we really bring to life the things that we're saying we want to do or the things that we think we already do. So we started that out in 2006. We had 2 summits, one in March and one in October, and they involved staff and administration and the program administrators, which are the folks that oversee all our district and regional offices for state child welfare. It involved all the tribal child welfare folks. It involved representatives from our family division of the court, as well as some state judges, and representation from our assistant attorney generals that represent us in child welfare cases, folks from the Administration of Children and Families for the Boston office, because we're part of the Region 1 ACF, as well as the Muskie School for Public Center as part of the University of Southern Maine, which staffed the event. And I think this was a really good experience because it was 2 days of everybody really interacting and really talking pretty openly about what the issues are. And I think one of the things that we had always done as a state, and many of our workers and supervisors did when we had ICWA cases, is we looked at tribal child welfare as another service, and how can this service help the families that we're involved with. And one of the things I think that this summit really brought home is tribal child welfare is not a service. Tribal child welfare is a government agency of each respective tribe, so it really needs to be thought of as a government-to-government relationship. And I think that changed how we started doing a lot of our work when we use that mentality. That and the fact that, you know, I think historically people aren't sure about, you know, our tribal child welfare folks, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but I think this is historically how some people looked at it, are tribal child welfare folks going to overlook some things because they know these families because it's happening in their community kind of things. And when everybody was introducing ourselves, I think one thing that really struck the state staff is that not very many people of the state staff had their master's degree. And when tribal child welfare started introducing themselves, they all had their master's degrees. And that's like a really little thing, but I think it really struck people in regard to the equity of the situation and what we were thinking of as white privilege as opposed to what people are really bringing to the table. So I think it really is sad that that's something that had to happen to change people's perspective, but I think that that's something that did happen that really brought some of these things home to folks. And after the summit, we really, and before the Truth and Reconciliation process began, we really started looking at ways of how can we partner better? How can we do things that are in the best interest of tribal children, not just from our perspective, but from tribal perspective. So we really built on that. And one of the first things we did that Esther mentioned really briefly is we started doing a couple of quality assurance reviews. And when we reviewed the ICWA cases, we didn't just open our SACWA system, our state automated child welfare system, and internally review the cases. We partnered with tribal child welfare, so every ICWA case was reviewed together by a state quality assurance person and by one of the tribal child welfare folks. So we were really, as Esther said, looking for things not just compliance with the law, not just family visits where siblings kept together, all those things that one looks at when they review cases, but we were also really looking through the narratives to kind of pick out what's white privilege and what do we need to work on and how do we need to educate our staff. So I think that that really moved us forward. And the next step that we did from there is we sat down and wrote our Indian child welfare policy together. So it wasn't something that the state wrote and then put out to staff and to the tribes. We actually started with a blank slate and wrote our policy together. And as folks know, the Indian Child Welfare Act really sort of kicks in when kids are entering the child welfare system. But we were educating people on the spirit of the law, and we really wanted to be able to practice that way as well. So in Maine, we really, and I'm not saying we're perfect at this, but this is what we strive for, and I think that we are pretty successful in a lot of ways. And what we really try to do is we co-case manage every case that's an ICWA case with tribal child welfare. For the tribes that are located in Maine. Obviously, this is harder to do, although we try to do it with tribes outside of Maine, but they don't have staff that can attend all of the meetings and that type of thing. But what we do right from the assessment process, the investigation process on, is as soon as we get a referral, if there's any indication that it's an ICWA case and we know the tribe, we're calling up the tribe and we're asking them to go out on the assessment with us to make decisions with us, so it's not us going out on the case making the decision and then informing tribal child welfare. And when tribes can't go to the assessment because due to distance or the staff limitations, because we obviously still need to see children within our time frames for safety. When we're making our preliminary safety decision, the caseworkers are supposed to be calling the tribal child welfare worker and making the decisions with them. We're supposed to be planning the family team meetings with tribal child welfare so that it really is an equal partnership on how decisions are being made. Some of the other things we've done, just because I'm trying to be mindful of time, is if tribes have approve or license their homes, then we accept their license and place the kids in the home, and we'll issue a state license and say that it's tribally approved so that we don't have to have placement as a barrier. We also do contract sharing. So for example, the state child welfare agencies have contracts with as I'm sure most of you do, with transportation agencies, with visitation agencies. We've written into all our contracts that referrals can come from the state child welfare agencies and the tribal child welfare agencies, because we do really understand that there is a financial discrepancy, and we don't want that to be a barrier for tribes taking their own children into custody and to have kids come into state custody for services. So we've opened up our contracts. If kids are in therapeutic foster homes or residential placements, the same thing applies. You know, Maine Care, Medicare pays for the treatment rate, but if a child, for example, is in custody of the Penobscot Nation and needs to be in therapeutic foster care or residential care, the state will pay for the room and board portion. So again, we're not creating a barrier that forces children to come into state custody versus tribal custody based on finances. We've done other things. I'm trying to think. We do a lot of sharing back and forth in addition to our Indian child welfare policy. Our permanency guardianship policy was largely written with tribal input, and we really did that because the tribes really accept customary adoption but not termination of parental rights. So we really don't want to TPR tribal children. So we developed a subsidized permanency guardianship so that termination of parental rights don't have to happen that way. In our new child plan, family plans that we've written, we've adopted the active efforts that were in the ICWA law and updated by the BIA recently to apply to all our kids in the state of Maine because it's really best practice. So I think one of the things that we've really tried to do is look at where the strengths are in each area and build on the strengths. So it doesn't have to be the way the state wants it done or the way the tribe wants it done. We all kind of step back and say what's really best for the kids. As Esther said, the ICWA work group did reconvene, so we are meeting at least every other month, and we always have a section of that meeting to discuss any case issues that are happening so that we can really make effective change as a case is progressing, as opposed to waiting till it's reached its end and then kind of looking back at it retrospectively. And the other thing that I think we're trying to do is really look at our language. And it may seem like a little thing, but there's a real difference when we're talking to our staff, to our state staff, and we say things like the tribes that are located in Maine as opposed to saying Maine's tribe, because Maine doesn't own the tribe. So we're really trying to watch our language, and hopefully we'll get to the point where we're talking about, you know, Native children that are living in Maine that used to be former Wabanaki territory. But, you know, it's just small steps to really recognize that it's a government-to-government relationship and that we need to respect not just the culture, but all pieces of what we're doing together. And as Esther said, you know, it really was not an easy process for us to reach this point. There was a lot of trust building, and we were kind of moving along at a slower rate when we just sort of stepped back and said, if this is going to work, we really need to know who we are as people. And we did some team building type of activities that really kind of humanized who everybody was. And I really, truly believe that one of the reasons that we have been so successful is because we have developed really good relationships and trust so that we can say things that we need to say to each other without anybody taking it overly personally and knowing that it's really coming from the place of keeping children safe. When Esther talks about when we rejoined to work on the TRC and the tribal child welfare folks presented us with this document and we were looking at it and we knew there was absolutely no way that the state was going to sign on to a lot of the pieces that were in the document. But it was really hard at first to say, you know, we don't agree with this, because we were saying in some format that we don't agree with what your history is. and that's not true. We just couldn't accept some of the way things were written because we knew that politically it wasn't going to move forward, and we really needed the system to move forward. So I think bottom line for me, when I look at what this journey has been like and what makes it successful, it really is that honesty and bringing everything to the table and working it out together. So, and I'm going to...
Thank you, Martha. There's a question, does Maine have higher standards or monitoring tools?
And Esther, I just want to pause for a quick second, too, because I think some folks unmuted their lines. Was there someone on the phone that had a question as well?
I'm not sure what folks mean by monitoring tools. We do have the questions that we asked when we did the QA process, but we don't necessarily have a different monitoring tool for ICWA cases because we meet with the tribes every other month, so we're talking about them, and if there are any issues with our district staff, the tribes or the district staff are calling me, so we're kind of doing it live and in person as opposed to on a tool and paper. And a question just came up about for intake for the state, how are line workers directed to a determined tribal enrollment? Our intake staff have to ask if there's any knowledge of ICWA, and if there is, then if it's a tribe in Maine that's located in Maine, 2 of our tribes have a tribal court system and 2 of our tribes don't. So for 2 of our tribes, they can take their own children into custody. So if the report is from one of those, in regard to one of those tribes, then our intake just sends it to tribal child welfare and they deal with the issue of investigating the child abuse and neglect. And if it's for the other 2 tribes or if it's a child that lives off reservation, as soon as it's assigned to an assessment worker, they contact the tribes. And we also ask about tribal membership, not only at intake and at that first visit of assessment, but we really train that you have to ask more than just once, and you don't just ask the parents, because we found that some parents may not want to say that they're affiliated with the tribe because they haven't wanted tribal child welfare to be involved, because tribal child welfare may know more about their family than we know, so they want to try to keep that separate. So we also direct people to ask every time you locate and have communication with a new relative, you need to ask them about Native heritage as well.
Thank you, Martha. Now we're going to hear from Shi Chen. Are you there, Shi?
Yes. Hi, everyone. So my name is Shi Chen again. So I'm an Assistant Attorney General, and our office represents DHHS, specifically the Office of Child and Family Services, in child welfare proceedings. So we take care of all the court representations for filings in the Maine district courts. And I've been a member of the ICWA work group since 2015 when this work group was reconvened. So what I'm going to touch on are just some of the issues that we've worked on recently over the past 3 years and just some of the prospective issues that we're going on looking forward. So I just want to first state that the ICWA work group has really been a wonderful experience for myself personally, and I think a large part of that is that there's a lot of mutual respect at the table that leads to a lot of open and frank communications. One of the goals of the ICWA work group is co-case management, and that what that takes the form of is respecting confidentiality for cases, and without delving too far into specifics, the members of the work group are able to discuss aspects of cases that are going well, that are not going well, and to frankly discuss what is needed, whether or not that's a legal solution, whether it's resources for the family, for the child, tribal resources, state resources, other third parties. It really leads to a lot of frank discussion and progress, not only for any one particular case, but also that impacts policy and wide-ranging initiatives across the state. So I think that's one of the primary benefits of the ICWA work group, is that all the parties come here with their specific sectors, their specific goals, and their specific expertise, but we kind of leave with the benefit of all those other opinions that we may not be exposed to. So just some of the things that we've worked on are, as Martha had mentioned, that we wrote the new policy together, that the policy for DHHS had input from the tribes, from tribal members, communities. So this really let us weigh a lot of opinions that may not have been considered, as Martha mentioned, some of the language, for instance, and just some of the things that may not be as intuitive just to any single party alone. Another issue, as Esther had mentioned, was the identification of qualified expert witnesses. We really realized that across the state that there were not enough qualified expert witnesses to meet the trial needs of the various district courts. So what happened was we really developed this initiative to first identify and try to recruit tribal community members into the qualified expert witness process. And then after that, we went on to kind of host training sessions. And what they were kind of legal training sessions to a certain extent, where we were able to expose these people to kind of the state child welfare system, what court looked like, what a typical proceeding looked like, go over the Indian Child Welfare Act, and more specifically go over the expectations, duties, and the roles of a qualified expert witness and what role they have in representing the interests of the tribes, testifying in court, and just how that all plays into the overall system. And so that's been one of our really great successes, and we have several more qualified expert witnesses. And at the same time, the tribes themselves are able to weigh in on the process, on the development, and on the training. So another aspect of this is that we can take the input of the tribes and also take the input of DHHS, of the Attorney General's office, and we can take that to impact practice. For instance, Martha mentioned that that we did a lot of training as part of the new initiatives. And starting from 2015, one of the focuses of our training has been going through with the various DHHS district offices across the state of Maine and really working on the identification of ICWA cases, making sure that in the primary stages of casework, before even necessarily court involvement, that the right questions were being asked and asked of multiple persons. So it's just making sure that the concept of ICWA is really well known across the state, and just making sure that that people are aware of ICWA, that it's not mysterious to people, and that it's really something to be identified early for the benefit of all parties involved. And so those are just some of the goals that we've been working on, and I think some of our successes. Just looking forward, we're looking to just expand what we've taken from the work group, to expand that into some legal training, incorporating more trainings for guardian ad litem, for instance, for court-appointed special advocates as well, so that just that throughout the state and geographically, where the tribes are located in Maine do not match up with where the majority of the population is in Maine. So we're just trying to balance all that and make sure that none of the ICWA cases are not being identified. So that's just some of the stuff we have going forward. I know we're running short on time, so I'll just leave it there.
Thank you so much, Shi. Now is Michael there. Would you like to share?
Sure. My name is Michael Augustine, and as I said before, I work child welfare for the Penobscot Nation. We are a community in central Maine, and we are one of the 2 tribes in the state of Maine that has their own child welfare court. So what that means is I And then tribal court, so any child that is living here on the reservation and who is on our census, we have exclusive jurisdiction over them. And I work closely with the state because not all of our members live here on the reservation. So for our members who do not live on our reservation, the state contacts me and we work together on cases. If they are relatively close to me, we may take jurisdiction of it, but it's not uncommon for us to have cases that are 2-3 hours away from us that we allow the state to take the lead on, and we case manage the cases together. We file an intervener status, and my experience has been that I have a great working relationship with the DHS caseworker, the guardian ad litems, the court personnel, all really understand and respect the position that the tribe has and the unique role that we have in these cases. And I think the work group, for me, we're all coming at this for the same reason. We want to protect children, not just Native children, all children, and a lot of the stuff that we can work together to help Native children can be applied as best practice for non-Native children for the state, and they're really receptive to some of the practices that we have, and when we're having trouble, I know I'm very comfortable talking about some of the struggles that I may have on a particular case, but I know most times I'm able to really talk about, I've really had a great experience with this caseworker out of the Machias office. We've been working really well together, really seems to understand the unique aspects of this case and the cultural connections that we're trying to establish for this child. And I never try and throw anyone under the bus, but I really like to, when something's going really well, I want it to be said on the record and their supervisors can hear about how well they're doing, because it's not every day that these workers are having to deal with the ICWA and this unique situation. So it's great that they are really receptive.
All right, Michael, thank you. Now we're going to go way up north. I'm going to go way up north to talk to Luke.
Hi, everybody. This is Luke Joseph. Well, my story started out kind of before I even got into this job. I started that, I grew up not too far from here in Holton. My parents were actually products of the system, 2 different systems. My mom was raised in foster care at the age of, I think, 10 or 11. Grew up, I would say, about an hour and a half from her family. She entered into foster care through a traumatic event where I'd say 6 relatives passed away. My grandmother, great-grandmother, and 4 other relatives. With that happening, my mom, like I said, entered foster care and stayed in foster care until she was 21, and then moved back to our community. My father, on the other hand, had a different path. He didn't grow up in foster care. He actually grew up in the criminal justice system through juvenile detention to county jails and state prisons, and then finally got out of there in his late years, like say 60s. So, and then with that, my mom grew up, like I said, went back to our community. Our tribe was, I think, federally recognized back in 1980. With that came some positions within the tribal government. My mom actually started out as the bus driver for, I think, an elders program, and then worked her way up to the social services, some sort of worker in there, and then eventually became child protective and ICWA. And from that, we kind of became the social worker family of the tribe. My mom actually, we became a fostering home, had foster children in and out of our homes, sometimes coming on the bus and not knowing who this person is that's walking in our house, and then asking, who's this person? So I know I've always kind of had been involved within child welfare through my parents and my mom and stuff like that, and it's been quite the experience because it helped, groom me to understanding not everybody's situation is what it seems on the surface. There's a lot more to it. Like I said, my mom and my parents divorced, and my mom was a single mother, so if I had to leave school or one of us had to do something, we kind of tagged along with my mom in the back seat or whatever. So we kind of got a little bit of stuff that my mom got a handle on when it came to some of her cases. And then that leads me to this. I actually fell into this field by accident. Initially started out as an activities coordinator, providing, cultural pieces to our kiddos in care, and then eventually moved up to the directorship pretty quickly, and then learning on the fly through my colleagues, and then this particular group, the ICWA Workgroup, helped me feel a little bit more secure when it comes to dealing with the issues that I was running into at the onset of my directorship with the tribe. And now it's gotten to the point where, a lot of the issues that we were able to work out with our colleagues within the state, we have this venue to do it, and within our district, we have a really great working relationship. From the onset, I tried to make myself as much personable to the caseworkers, supervisors, and what have you, just to try to, mend some bridges that may have been burnt in the past, or rebuild them that have been just totally destroyed. That's one of the things I tried to do out the gate from the get-go. And one of the biggest things that I can, pull from out of all this is the level of communication that takes place and that keeps this successful. I think we're on a daily talking basis with most of our caseworkers, texting, and even outside of work as well too, seeing them out in public and being more personable, has kind of helped us, make it more friendlier to the, DHS, and likewise too, because I think it's helped our relationship. And being able to make those phone calls in those really difficult situations where the state may be having to take custody of somebody, and already knowing, the backstory behind some of our cases, and having that, that trusting that relationship with the caseworker if they're going down that road, and if they decide to file for protections and stuff like that. It's us having those conversations prior to that, and I think that's helped us in our program out a lot. And our service area is the state, so our state is pretty big. I'm not sure of the total mileage, but as far as it's a significant area to cover. So and we don't have the privilege of having a tribal court. So even if our court cases were close by, we're still privy to the state court systems. Now, we do have our ICWA lawyer, who's local. He's a pretty decent guy. And we've had another lawyer, too, who I think helped our program, secure footing and get our voices heard throughout the state. Lisa Chase, I can't give her enough praise and to helping us mold what our current program is now. But yeah, I think, like I said, one of the biggest things that our program, I think, prides itself on is the communication that we have with our colleagues at the department. And yeah, I think that's about all I got.
All right, thank you, Luke.
So
unless there's any other specific questions from folks that are tuning in, we've we've set some panel discussion questions here that I'll put up on the screen. And the first one is, what makes this collaboration effective? And I know some of you touched on that a little bit, but if there's anything else any one of you want to add to that, I like it when Martha started talking about how this was a different group, and I hear that a lot from state folks. They, you know, I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but sometimes they wear their jeans to the meeting because we really try to make that space a place where people can bring their whole selves into the process. So I don't know if any of the other folks had anything they wanted to share about what you think makes this specific collaboration effective.
I think that part of it is really, this is Martha, I think part of it is really the respect and that we as a state entity took the time to really understand the history. So we didn't go into it saying, okay, there's this law we have to follow, how do we do it? We went into it saying, okay, we don't get this, so teach us how we should be doing this and what's going to work for your community and what's going to work for us as a state agency. And I think that made a big piece of the difference, that nobody really is in charge or kind of controls what happens.
Yeah, this is Luke Joseph. Yeah, I think one thing too that sticks out is when we're in those meetings and laying out that it's not the dominant culture's perspective of how a family should be, or and the state accepting that. Like that's one of those things I think that has improved with us, is they're hearing our point of view, how we perceive things, how we culturally perceive things, and then respecting that.
This is
I think for me,
oh, go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Sri.
Go ahead. Sorry, Michael. So one of the things for me is that just functionally, I think everyone's very committed to the work group. So that way, when we have our meetings and even in between, we contact each other. And what happens is we, you know, as much as we would love to, we don't solve all of our issues at every meeting. So what happens is we can take time to go to our respective offices, talk to other people, and if need be, work other people into maybe the next work group meeting, and therefore kind of just troubleshoot the issues that come up. And so that way, it's a continually forward-moving process, that it doesn't just start and stop once every 2 months or once every month, that it's kind of this continual process, and I think that really keeps it at the forefront, and I think that's a really helpful part of how we proceed as a work group.
And I think, too, that we move it back to where it needs to be. Like Luke talked about having a really good relationship with the local district office that he works with. So it's not like because it's an ICWA case, it has to always go through central office type of thing. Or just this year, we've started it so at least twice a year, the ICWA work group is going to meet with the district management team. So it's the folks in central office that are administration, and then the folks that supervise each district office. So we really try to keep communication moving at all levels.
Michael, were you going to say something?
Yes. Sorry, I got distracted here. Multitasking. For me, one of the things that I feel like makes us so successful is that everyone that participates in these meetings are coming with an open mind, being respectful. The food helps. I won't lie. There's typically some food, so that helps to create a welcoming environment. And it's also the fact that we're committed to coming together on a regular basis. We see each other, and we see that we are not going to be able to resolve everything at one meeting, and it might take a few months for something. But typically, we can resolve some issues, whether they are intertribal issues, or whether there are issues with the state and tribal. It's an opportunity to really work together to resolve these issues. I like the fact that there's so many different representatives from the state, not just child welfare. You have AAG, you have a wide representation of state employees, as well as the tribal organizations and the tribal, the various Wabanaki communities here in the state of Maine.
Yeah, the state family court division also attends these meetings, so we really do try to cover everything.
Great. So I'd invite participants to either to join the discussion by answering in the chat box, or you can also speak if you'd like. Either commenting on what makes a collaboration effective if there's one that you're involved in, or consider sharing what challenges that you have or you might foresee. Maybe you're thinking about a tribal state collaboration. We really want to make sure that folks leave here with a good kind of outlook of what it takes. There's a lot of positive, wonderful things generated through the ICWA work group, but it's not always fun. It's not always easy. There are really difficult conversations that have to happen, but the value of having those conversations, setting aside time to have those conversations, and then setting up processes to have those conversations when it's outside of the meeting time has been very helpful, and to do those in person and spend that time together. We have several folks, from the state. We have 2 people from the Maine court system, 2 people from the AG's office, and 2 people from OCFS, and it's, that's quite a commitment on their part to think about these 6 people taking, all very busy, taking that time out. So and there's such a benefit to that, to taking the time to get together and to be in person and to build a relationship with each other. I know when we first got back together in 2015, I think we spent our first meeting just playing games and getting to know each other. That's how I know, who has what for pets and all of those things. So I know early on when the ICWA work group first started, and we were having some real difficult challenges in being in the room together. Martha talked about that mistrust. Well, that was there, and it comes out in different ways. Sometimes it comes out sideways. It's like we're trying to make a soup sandwich, right, and it's going to come out. So this one particular meeting that stands out to me, we got into groups of 3, and we each got 2 minutes to share something about ourselves as people, not just as this child welfare professional, but as people, something about ourselves that we wanted to share with the other folks. And for me anyway, that point was real critical in my growth, and I saw how it really moved the work forward when people were able to, like I said before, bring their whole selves. And I think it was particularly important for the folks from the state because, as Martha said, the difference was that they were thinking of these cases and we're thinking of them as our families. So the reasons that we're around that table were very different too. A lot of the Native people around the table, were, like Luke explained how he got into this work. His family was the service provider, and it's almost like sometimes we feel like we don't have a choice. That this is really life or death for our people, and we're here because this is our, we're thinking of the 7th generation. We're not just thinking about, and then the state folks have those same motivations and those same passions, but sometimes they're not able to bring those into all of their spaces that they have to be a professional in. So we really try to make it easy for them to bring all of that there. And to me, that was where I see, the work really taken off is when we did that and took that time to get to know each other. A lot of the things that we're talking about, we'll show you provide you some links at the end. There's a website that really delves into some of these things we're talking about a little bit more too, and there's resources and a toolkit available for to do some of the activities, and even an agenda, an annotated agenda that's a sample agenda and ways that we set up the meeting and different processes that we did early on to establish that, and those are available on a website. All right, we can maybe go to one more question. Do we have enough time for the next question? Why is participation in this work group important to you? I just shared a little bit about why it was important to me, and I didn't know if any of the other panelists wanted to share as well.
Sure, this is Shi Chen. I think for me as an attorney, and now Esther's got me self-conscious about using the word case, but we do, most of our job is spent litigating active cases, and so much of our effort is put into the court system, active cases, and all the legal ins and outs of cases that it's really effective for me to be able to take a step back, attend these work group meetings, and be in contact with all the partners, and really have a greater exposure to a lot of these issues that I may not see otherwise. These are issues that are often preceding court cases, and I can see how maybe they are influencing court cases, how they end up in certain aspects of the legal process or the legal system. But it's really helpful to see all the other aspects that maybe we wouldn't normally see, and that really helps inform what we're doing. And I really feel like it makes us more efficient as an office, in that if we do, for instance, run into any legal issues, we now have all these connections to tribal resources, to tribal people that we may not known of before. And really it helps us avoid unnecessary litigation, unnecessary court time on a lot of issues. And to me, that's really important for what we do, and I think that really makes a difference for everyone involved.
Yeah, this is Esther again. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is Martha, and I think there's two reasons for me. Like, professionally, it is, I think we all got into this to really make sure that we're able to do what's best for kids. And having learned all that I've learned that it is really best for kids to remain within their culture. And the ICWA work group really supports that and makes that happen in a lot of cases. And for me personally, I think just the things I've learned doing this process and through the Truth and Reconciliation, I'm just appalled at what our ancestors did and the white privilege that you come with that you don't really know about. So for me personally, it's just really good to be able to try to affect any type of change.
Great. When she was speaking, I was thinking about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission process and how one of the chiefs here, the chief of the Penobscot Nation, Kirk Francis, had always thought that, had hopes that that process we went through, that truth, healing, and change process, that the group went through, and then, he always thought that it could be replicated in other areas of tribal-state collaboration. Because if we can come together around, our most precious thing as our children, then we can come together around any issue. So we're almost out of time. I have, I'm wondering, instead of the next question that we had, I can talk a little bit about these links here. That this link here, building an effective tribal state Tribal State Child Welfare Partnership is a web page that we've put together through the Capacity Building Center for Tribes. And it, as I said before, it details a lot of the work that went into establishing the ICWA work group early on, and then has there's a lot of tools there. We're really excited to announce that on October 16th in Maine, the ICWA work group is sponsoring and facilitating a day-long training on ICWA. We are holding it in one location. We have room for 90 folks, and then we're expecting 50 more in another location through the teleconference. And that will be recorded and stored on the Tribal Information Exchange. And then Dawnland is a film, a documentary film about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission process here in Maine, and it's being screened all over the country, and it will also be shown on November 5th on public television, Independent Lens, and then a few of us will be available we'll be on chat with people after the premiere on Independent Lens to answer questions. There are, that link will take you to the film, and then the Upstander Productions is the group that produced the film, and they have a lot of learning resources on their website for both Dawnland and then the shorter film that they released before Dawnland called First Light, about the same process. And they have a teacher's guide and Upstander Academy and a lot of wonderful things. If you're interested in having Dawnland screened in your community, there's a link there and a form to fill out as well. And yes, I'll also mention in the chat box, those of you who are on in the webinar room, we have provided 2 links, one to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report and one to the archives. And the archives are all the video, actually they're mostly audio recordings of the official statements that people gave to the commission. They gathered 90 plus statements from Wabanaki people, and they gathered about 60 from non-Native people, from Mainers, judges, attorneys, foster parents, foster siblings, child welfare workers, past and present. Just a lot of courageous sharing that folks did on both sides, and a lot of healing that happened as well. So I don't know if anyone has any other questions for any of our panelists. I want to thank everyone for tuning in and thank all the folks from the ICWA work group. We've been talking about and planning this day for so long. It's really good to be with you and to hear. You know, I don't often stop and ask these questions of each other, so I really feel blessed and fortunate to hear from you in this way as well. All right, there's a comment in the box from Miss Nishi Lester from Upstander that if anyone's interested in the teacher's guide, you can find it here, and she provided a link. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And just a quick
And Laura, this will be recorded, right?
Yes, this is recorded. So we'll post the recording from today's webinar to the Tribal Information Exchange. And in just a few minutes, I'll be sending everyone an email with a link to a very short evaluation. So if you can take a few minutes just to share your feedback about how today went, that would be super helpful. I'm also going to leave the webinar room open for a bit if you wanted to open those links, bookmark them, whatever you need. We'll have this room available too. So thank you all so much. Esther, you're wonderful. All of the presenters, I know how busy you are, and we really appreciate you sharing this information with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great day.